The silent stalker the shadow among hunters, Zephyr moved through the corridors of Nexus Station like living darkness, his form shifting between solid matter and pure shadow. As an umbral assassin, he belonged to one of the most feared species in the galaxy. His kind could phase through walls, become invisible at will, and strike without warning. For 3,000 years, the Umbral had been the galaxy's most efficient killers, hired by those who needed problems to disappear permanently. The luxury space station buzzed with wealthy travelers from dozens of worlds, all blissfully unaware that death walked among them. Nexus Station served as a neutral meeting ground for diplomats, merchants, and tourists, making it the perfect hunting ground for someone of Zephyr's particular skills. The station's elegant promenades and expensive restaurants provided excellent cover for his work. Zephyr had been tracking his target for 2 days now, studying patterns and routines. The contract was simple: eliminate a human engineer who had been asking too many questions about certain classified technologies. The client hadn't specified why this particular human needed to die, but Zephyr didn't care about motives. He cared about the substantial payment waiting in his account once the job was finished. The perfect target, his target, appeared to be the most unremarkable being on the entire station. Marcus Chun, according to the intelligence file, was a maintenance engineer from the Terran Federation. He was of average height for his species, with dark hair and calm brown eyes that seemed to notice everything around him. He wore simple work clothes and carried a basic toolkit, looking like exactly what he claimed to be: a technician doing routine repairs. What made Marcus perfect prey, in Zephyr's opinion, was his complete lack of apparent defenses. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as a relatively new species, having only achieved spaceflight within the last few centuries. They had no natural weapons, no enhanced physical abilities, and no obvious survival adaptations. Most galactic species considered them to be clever but fragile, useful for their engineering skills, but hardly threatening in any meaningful way. Zephyr watched from the shadows as Marcus worked on a maintenance panel in one of the station's quieter sections. The human's movements were precise and methodical, showing the kind of focused attention that suggested genuine expertise. He hummed quietly to himself while working, occasionally pausing to examine a component more closely or make notes on a handheld device. The assassin had killed hundreds of beings over his career, and he prided himself on reading his targets correctly. Some were fighters who would struggle until the end. Others were cowards who would beg for mercy. A few were philosophers who would spend their last moments trying to understand why they had to die. Marcus Chun, however, seemed to be something else entirely. Completely oblivious to danger, an unexpected greeting Zephyr had been observing for nearly an hour when something impossible happened. Without looking up from his work, Marcus spoke directly to him. If you're going to keep watching me, you might as well come over and say hello. I've got coffee in my thermos if you want some. The umbral assassin froze. He was completely invisible, had made no sound, and was standing in a shadow that should have provided perfect concealment. There was no way the human could have detected his presence. Yet Marcus was clearly addressing him, still focused on his repair work, but with a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," Zephyr replied, allowing himself to become partially visible. His species' natural form was tall and lean, with dark skin that seemed to absorb light and eyes that glowed with a faint silver luminescence. "Sure you are," Marcus said, finally looking up from his work. "You're that umbral who's been following me around for the past 2 days. Pretty good at staying hidden, I'll give you that. Most people would never have noticed you." Zephyr's training kicked in. If his cover was blown, the smart move was to complete the assassination immediately and worry about explanations later. He began to shift into his attack form, his hands extending into razor-sharp claws that could slice through most materials with ease. "Whoa there, big guy," Marcus said, holding up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Before you do whatever you're planning to do, you might want to think about where we are." The human gestured around the corridor, and Zephyr suddenly became aware of several things he had missed in his focus on the target. Security cameras were positioned to cover every angle of the hallway. The maintenance panel Marcus had been working on was actually a junction point for the station's communication systems. And most importantly, they were standing directly beneath one of the station's primary sensor arrays. See, the thing about being a maintenance engineer, Marcus continued conversationally, is that you learn a lot about how systems work. Security systems, for instance. Right now, every sensor on this level is recording everything we do. If something unfortunate were to happen to me, well, let's just say the station's AI would have a very clear recording of who was responsible. Warnings from the shadows before Zephyr could respond, a new voice spoke from behind him. You really don't want to do this, friend. The assassin spun around to see a Korthax trader emerging from a nearby shop. The centipede-like being's multiple eyes were focused on Zephyr, with an expression of deep concern. Korthax were known for their extensive knowledge of galactic politics and their ability to sense trouble before it started. Vectar, Zephyr acknowledged the trader with a nod. This doesn't concern you. Actually, it does, Vectar replied, his mandibles clicking nervously. You see, I've been trading in this sector for over 50 years, and I've learned one very important rule. Never ever mess with humans. Not unless you want to find yourself on the wrong end of a very short conversation with their military. It's just one human, Zephyr said, though he kept his claws extended. What possible threat could one engineer pose? Vectar's entire body shuddered, a sign of extreme distress among his species. That's what the Zelkaran Empire said when they captured a human exploration vessel about 10 years ago. Just one ship, they thought. Just a small crew of scientists and engineers. Nothing to worry about. I've never heard of the Zelkaran Empire, Zephyr said, though something cold was beginning to form in his stomach. Exactly, Vectar replied. Because 3 months after they captured that ship, the Zelkaran Empire ceased to exist. The humans sent a diplomatic mission to negotiate the return of their people. When the Zelkarans refused, the humans demonstrated why that was a mistake. A reputation revealed Marcus, who had been listening to this exchange with apparent interest, decided to join the conversation. Oh, you're talking about the Procyon incident. Yeah, that was unfortunate. We really did try to resolve things peacefully first. Peacefully? Vectar's voice rose several octaves. You turned their entire fleet into space debris in under 6 hours. Well, they did refuse to return our people, Marcus said with a shrug, and they made some very rude comments about human intelligence. Admiral Rodriguez took that personally. Zephyr found himself in the unusual position of being genuinely confused. You're talking about one human fleet defeating an entire empire? Oh, it wasn't a fleet, Marcus corrected. It was one ship. The diplomatic vessel had a full suite of human military technology, but the Zelkarans didn't know that. They thought it was just a transport. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. One ship? Zephyr's voice came out as barely a whisper. The thing about human engineering, Marcus continued, apparently warming to the subject, is that we don't really make a distinction between civilian and military technology. Everything we build has the potential to be weaponized if necessary. This maintenance scanner I'm using, for instance, could be reconfigured to overload power systems throughout the station. Not that I would do that, of course. I'm just saying it's possible. Vectar nodded vigorously. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Humans don't just build tools. They build tools that can become weapons, that can become solutions to problems that haven't even been invented yet. They're like mechanical wizards. We prefer the term adaptive engineers, Marcus said with a grin. But I appreciate the sentiment. The friendly predator Zephyr was beginning to realize that his simple assassination contract might be more complicated than he had initially thought. You're still just one human, he said, though his claws were beginning to retract involuntarily. That's true, Marcus agreed. But here's the thing about humans. We're social creatures. We form bonds with other species. We make friends. And we really don't like it when our friends get hurt. Friends? Zephyr asked. Well, you've been keeping me company for 2 days now, Marcus said with a laugh. That's more consistent social contact than I've had with anyone else on this station. Plus, you're clearly a professional. I respect that. So, yeah, I'd say we're friends. Vectar made a sound that might have been laughter or terror. He's adopted you, the trader said to Zephyr. That's what humans do. They adopt people. Once you're adopted by a human, you're part of their pack. And humans will do absolutely anything to protect their pack. I haven't been adopted by anyone, Zephyr protested. I'm here to kill him. Are you, though? Marcus asked, tilting his head thoughtfully. Because it seems to me like you've had plenty of opportunities over the past 2 days, and yet here we are having a conversation. Maybe you're not really here to kill me. Maybe you're here because you're curious about humans. The assassin opened his mouth to deny this, then stopped. Marcus was right. He had indeed had numerous opportunities to complete his mission, but something had held him back each time. He had told himself it was professional caution, waiting for the perfect moment, but now he wasn't sure. I am curious, he admitted reluctantly. Your species has an unusual reputation. Unusual how? Marcus asked, genuinely interested. You're described as both peaceful and terrifying, Zephyr said. Diplomatic, but ruthless. Friendly, but dangerous. It's confusing. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Yeah, I can see how that would be confusing. The thing is, all of those things are true. We are peaceful. We prefer to solve problems through conversation and cooperation. But we're also survivors. We come from a world that spent millions of years trying to kill us, and we refuse to die. That leaves marks on a species. What kind of marks? Zephyr asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Well, Marcus said, leaning back against the maintenance panel, let me tell you about a little concept we call human ingenuity. It's what happens when you take a species that evolved to solve problems under pressure and give them access to advanced technology. The results can be surprising. As Marcus began to speak, Zephyr realized that his simple assassination mission had become something else entirely. He was about to receive an education in why humans were truly feared throughout the galaxy, and something told him that by the time it was over, he would never look at the universe the same way again. The hunter had become the student, and the prey was about to become the teacher in a lesson that would change everything Zephyr thought he knew about the nature of predators and prey in the galaxy. The uncomfortable truth lessons in human engineering Marcus pulled out a simple drinking container from, his tool kit, and unscrewed the top, releasing the rich aroma of what humans called coffee. The smell alone seemed to make several nearby aliens unconsciously step back, though Zephyr wasn't sure why. You know, Zephyr, Marcus said, having somehow learned the assassin's name without it ever being mentioned, the real problem with trying to understand humans is that most species make the same mistake. They look at us and see what we appear to be rather than what we actually are. And what you actually are? Zephyr found himself asking, despite every instinct telling him to complete his mission and leave. Survivors, Marcus replied simply, but not just any kind of survivors. We're the kind of survivors who looked at a planet full of things trying to eat us, poison us, freeze us, burn us, or crush us, and decided to make friends with all of them. Vectar, who had been nervously hovering nearby, suddenly clicked his mandibles in what Zephyr recognized as agreement. It's true. I've seen the records. Humans domesticated wolves. Wolves. Do you know what wolves are? Predators. Zephyr ventured. Apex predators, Vectar corrected. Pack hunters with intelligence, strategy, and enough bite force to crush bones. And humans looked at them and thought, you know what? These would make great pets. They turned their planet's most efficient killers into companions who would die to protect human children. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. Oh, but it gets better. We didn't stop with wolves. We domesticated big cats, bears, even some species of venomous snakes. There's a human settlement on Kepler 442b where they've successfully domesticated the local equivalent of dragons. Actual fire-breathing, flying dragons. That's impossible, Zephyr said, though his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Marcus asked, pulling out his handheld device. Let me show you something. The device projected a holographic image of what appeared to be a massive, winged creature with scales that gleamed like metal and eyes like molten gold. Riding on its back, was a human child who couldn't have been more than 10 years old, laughing with pure joy as they soared through clouds. "That's my niece Sarah," Marcus said proudly. "She's training to be a dragon veterinarian. Her dragon's name is Copper, and he's about as gentle as a creature with nuclear breath can be. They're best friends." Zephyr stared at the image, trying to process what he was seeing. "Your species gives children nuclear-powered flying predators as pets? Well, they have to earn them first," Marcus said, reasonably. Sarah spent 3 years learning dragon psychology, behavior patterns, and safety protocols before she was allowed to bond with Copper. "We're not irresponsible about it. The art of problem-solving, but let's talk about something more relevant to your situation," Marcus continued, casually reaching into his toolkit. "Human problem-solving methodology." He pulled out what appeared to be a standard molecular wrench, the kind of basic tool found in any engineer's kit throughout the galaxy. "See this? Standard maintenance tool, right? Used for adjusting molecular bonds in structural materials." Zephyr nodded, not sure where this was going. "Wrong," Marcus said with a smile. "I mean, yes, that's its intended function. But watch this." With a few quick adjustments, Marcus had somehow reconfigured the tool into something that hummed with energy and projected a small but intensely bright beam of light. Plasma cutter, perfect for breaching reinforced doors or, in pinch, personal defense. He made another adjustment, and the tool's configuration changed again. Now, it emitted a high-frequency vibration that made Zephyr's bones ache. Sonic disruptor, very effective against most organic nervous systems. A third adjustment transformed it into something that looked suspiciously like a scanning device. And this setting can map the internal structure of walls, locate hidden passages, or identify the weak points in virtually any structure. One tool, dozens of applications. Marcus concluded, returning the device to its original configuration and slipping it back into his kit. That's human engineering in a nutshell. We don't just build things for one purpose. We build things that can be adapted to solve problems we haven't even encountered yet. Vectar's eyes had grown wide during this demonstration. "How many of your tools can be weaponized?" "All of them," Marcus replied without hesitation. "But that's not really the point. The point is that we build everything with the assumption that we might need to use it in ways the original designers never intended. It's called adaptive thinking, and it's the reason humans have survived in environments that would kill most other species. The weight of history, I think," said a new voice, "that our young assassin friend needs to understand some context." Zephyr turned to see an elderly Altarian approaching them. The blue-skinned, four-armed being moved with the careful dignity of advanced age, but her eyes were sharp with intelligence. Altarians were known throughout the galaxy as living libraries, beings who devoted their extended lifespans to collecting and preserving knowledge. "Elder Thessa," Vectar said respectfully, "we were just discussing human capabilities." "Indeed," Thessa replied, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "And it occurs to me that a proper education requires historical context. Young Shadow Walker, do you know why the Galactic Council established the Human Accords?" Zephyr shook his head. He was an assassin, not a political scholar. "The Human Accords," Thessa explained, "were established after the Rigel incident approximately 15 years ago. A human colony ship, the New Horizon, was attacked by Krillian raiders while attempting to establish a settlement on Rigel 7. "I've heard of the Krillians," Zephyr said. "Brutal warriors. They enslaved entire species." "Indeed, the Krillians captured the New Horizon and enslaved its population of 3,000 humans. They expected the humans to submit, as most species did when faced with superior firepower and the threat of death." Marcus had grown very quiet during this recounting, his friendly demeanor replaced by something much more serious. "The humans did not submit," Thessa continued. "Instead, they began what they called a resistance campaign. Using nothing but scavenged materials and their own ingenuity, they turned the Krillian slave facility into a fortress. They converted maintenance equipment into weapons, reprogrammed security systems to work against their captors, and organized themselves into an efficient military unit. A slave rebellion, Zephyr said. Admirable, but ultimately futile against superior numbers and firepower. That's what the Krillians thought, Thessa agreed. Until the humans did something unprecedented, they didn't just rebel against their captors, they recruited them. Recruited? Zephyr's voice cracked slightly. Humans, you see, are remarkably good at understanding what motivates other beings. They discovered that many of the Krillian guards were themselves enslaved, forced to serve through threats to their families. So, the humans offered them a deal. Help us escape, and we'll help you free your people. Marcus spoke up for the first time in several minutes. The Krillian Empire had been built on fear and oppression for over 1,000 years, but they'd never encountered a species that responded to oppression by trying to understand and help their oppressors. Within 6 months, Thessa continued, the human slaves had not only freed themselves, but had sparked a galaxy-wide revolution that brought down the entire Krillian Empire. They didn't just escape. They liberated every slave world, freed every captive species, and convinced most of the Krillian military to switch sides. And then, Marcus added quietly, we helped them rebuild their society based on cooperation instead of domination. Former Krillian slave masters are now some of our closest allies in the Outer Rim territories. The true nature of diplomacy, Zephyr, was beginning to feel like the universe had somehow shifted around him while he wasn't paying attention. You turned your enemies into allies. We turned enemies into friends. Marcus corrected. There's a difference. Allies work with you because it's convenient. Friends work with you because they believe in what you're doing. But how is that possible? Because, said Thessa, humans have a unique approach to conflict resolution. Most species view conflict as a zero-sum game. For one side to win, the other must lose. Humans, however, view conflict as a problem to be solved, and they're very, very good at solving problems. Marcus pulled out his device again and showed Zephyr another holographic image. This one showed a massive space station orbiting a beautiful blue-green world. Ships of dozens of different designs were docked at various ports, and beings of multiple species could be seen walking through transparent corridors. That's New Krillos, Marcus said, the capital of the former Krillian Empire. Now, it's a thriving multicultural hub where former slaves and former masters work together to build a better future. The station processes trade from over 200 worlds and serves as a neutral meeting ground for species that used to be at war. We didn't conquer the Krillians, he continued. We convinced them that there was a better way to live, and then we helped them build it. Zephyr stared at the image, trying to reconcile this vision of cooperation with everything he thought he knew about conquest and domination. This is what humans call diplomacy. This is what humans call Tuesday, Vectar muttered. Understanding the reputation, I think Thessa said gently, our young friend is beginning to understand why humans have such an unusual reputation throughout the galaxy. I'm starting to, Zephyr admitted, but I still don't understand why other species fear you. Everything you've described sounds admirable. Marcus and Thessa exchanged a look that made Zephyr's survival instinct start screaming again. The thing is, Marcus said carefully, everything we've told you represents humans when we're trying to be nice, when we're working to build friendships and solve problems peacefully. And most of the time, that's exactly what we want to do. Most of the time, Zephyr asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Well, Marcus continued, the flip side of being really good at making friends is being really good at dealing with beings who hurt our friends. And when humans decide that someone needs to be dealt with, well, we bring the same level of creativity and determination to that problem as we do to everything else. Thessa nodded gravely. The human accords weren't just established to formalize human diplomatic relationships. They were also established to create clear guidelines for what constitutes an act of aggression against humanity or their allies. Why? Zephyr asked. Because, Marcus said, his friendly smile taking on a quality that made Zephyr's blood run cold. The galaxy discovered that when humans decide to solve the problem of an aggressive species, they don't just win, They win so completely and decisively that the problem never comes up again. Take the Hegemony Wars, Thessa added. A coalition of militant species decided that humans were becoming too influential and needed to be eliminated. They launched a coordinated attack on 12 human colonies simultaneously. What happened? Zephyr found himself asking, despite knowing he wouldn't like the answer. The war lasted exactly 72 hours, Marcus replied. At the end of it, the attacking fleet had been completely destroyed. Their home worlds had surrendered unconditionally, and their governments had been replaced with democratically elected councils that signed non-aggression treaties with humanity. In 72 hours, humans, Thessa explained, don't just prepare for the wars they're fighting. They prepare for the wars they might have to fight. When the hegemony attacked, humanity activated defense protocols that had been in development for decades. Technologies that most species couldn't develop in centuries, humans had created as contingency plans. Marcus nodded. We really do prefer peace, but we've learned that the best way to maintain peace is to make sure that everyone understands the consequences of breaking it. As Zephyr stood there, processing everything he had learned, he began to realize that his simple assassination contract had become something far more complex. He wasn't just dealing with a single human engineer. He was dealing with a representative of a species that had turned friendship into a weapon and peace into a strategy, and Marcus Chun, with his calm demeanor and casual demonstrations of human ingenuity, was beginning to look less like prey and more like the most dangerous being Zephyr had ever encountered. The apex revelation, the moment of truth, as if summoned by their conversation about human military capabilities, the station's emergency klaxons suddenly began blaring. Red warning lights bathed the corridor in an ominous glow, and the calm voice of the station's AI echoed through the halls. Attention, all passengers and crew. The station is experiencing a critical system failure in the primary reactor core. All non-essential personnel are advised to move to emergency shelters immediately. This is not a drill. Zephyr watched as panic immediately spread through the area. Aliens of various species began running toward the emergency shelters, their voices rising in fear and confusion. The Umbral Assassin's enhanced senses could detect the acrid smell of overheating plasma conduits and the subtle vibration in the station's hull that indicated serious structural stress. Marcus, however, remained perfectly calm. He finished his coffee, carefully screwed the lid back onto his thermos, and stood up with the unhurried movements of someone who had dealt with emergencies before. Well, he said conversationally, that's unfortunate timing. Zephyr, I don't suppose you'd be interested in postponing our little dance of death until after we prevent this station from exploding? The station is exploding, Zephyr asked, his survival instincts finally overriding his confusion about human nature. Not yet, Marcus replied, pulling out his scanning device and pointing it toward the nearest wall. But reactor containment failures have a tendency to escalate quickly. We've probably got about 20 minutes before the cascade becomes irreversible. Vectar, who had been frozen in terror since the alarm started, suddenly came to life. 20 minutes? The emergency protocols call for a minimum evacuation time of 45 minutes. Emergency protocols, Marcus said with a slight smile, are written by beings who don't understand the creative applications of human engineering. Thessa, I don't suppose you know the exact specifications of this station's reactor design? The elderly Altarian's forearms moved rapidly as she accessed her vast memory. Nexus Station uses a Class 7 antimatter containment system with trilithium stabilizers and quantum field generators for backup containment. Perfect, Marcus said, already moving toward a maintenance access panel. Zephyr, I could use someone with your particular skills. Those shadow phase abilities of yours would be very helpful for accessing areas that are currently sealed off. You want my help? Zephyr asked incredulously. I want everyone's help, Marcus replied, his friendly demeanor unchanged despite the crisis. This is what humans call a team-building exercise. The engineer's true nature as Marcus began working on the maintenance panel, Zephyr noticed something that made his blood run cold. The human's movements had changed. The casual, slightly clumsy engineer had been replaced by someone whose every action was precise, efficient, and purposeful. His hands moved over the complex systems with the kind of familiarity that came from extensive training, not routine maintenance work. Marcus, Zephyr said slowly, exactly what kind of engineer are you? The kind that specializes in keeping things running under difficult circumstances. Marcus replied without looking up from his work. Vector, I need you to access the station's communication array and send a message to any human ships in the area. Tell them we have a containment situation and request immediate technical support. What should I tell them? Vector asked nervously. Just say code Prometheus. They'll understand. Fess's eyes widened at those words. Code Prometheus? That's a human military designation. Is it? Marcus asked innocently, though Zephyr noticed his hands had somehow produced several tools that definitely weren't standard maintenance equipment. Funny how these classifications get mixed up sometimes. The pieces were starting to fall into place in Zephyr's mind, and he didn't like the picture they were forming. You're not just an engineer. Oh, I'm definitely an engineer, Marcus replied, having somehow gained access to systems that should have required administrative clearance. I'm just the kind of engineer who learned his trade in environments where failure meant death for everyone around him. Military, Zephyr said, the word coming out like a curse. Former military, Marcus corrected. These days I work for the Terran Diplomatic Corps. Much more civilized. Usually. Vector made a sound like a dying wind instrument. The Terran Diplomatic Corps? You mean the people who convinced the Andromedans to surrender by parking a fleet in their star system and asking politely if they'd like to discuss peace terms? Among other things, Marcus admitted, we prefer to think of ourselves as problem solvers. Seeing humanity in action as Marcus worked, Zephyr began to understand what he was witnessing. This wasn't just emergency repair work. This was human military engineering in action, and it was unlike anything the assassin had ever seen. Marcus had somehow gained access to the station's central computer systems and was not just diagnosing the reactor problem, but was actively redesigning the containment protocols in real time. His hands moved across multiple interfaces simultaneously, and holographic displays showed him making modifications to systems that most engineers would need days to understand. The problem, Marcus explained as he worked, is that whoever designed this reactor didn't account for quantum cascade resonance in the trilithium matrix. It's a rookie mistake, really. You get harmonic feedback between the antimatter containment field and the backup stabilizers, and the whole thing starts vibrating itself apart. Can it be fixed? Thessa asked. Not with conventional methods, Marcus replied. The resonance frequency is too high for standard dampening systems. But if we reconfigure the quantum field generators to create a counter-resonance pattern, we can actually use the harmonic feedback to strengthen the containment field instead of weakening it. Zephyr watched in growing amazement as Marcus implemented what appeared to be a completely theoretical solution using nothing but the station's existing systems. How do you know that will work? Because humans have a saying, Marcus replied, his hands never stopping their complex dance across the control interfaces. When you can't solve a problem by removing it, solve it by making it work for you instead of against you. As he spoke, the station's vibrations began to change. The harsh, irregular shaking that had indicated imminent catastrophe was gradually being replaced by a steady, rhythmic pulse. There, Marcus said with satisfaction, the reactor is now more stable than it was before the cascade started. We've essentially turned a critical failure into a system upgrade. The response before anyone could fully process what had just happened, the station's communication system crackled to life. Nexus Station, this is the Terran vessel Indomitable. We received a code Prometheus signal. What's your status? Marcus activated the communication panel. Indomitable, this is Agent Chen. Situation is resolved. False alarm. Copy that, Agent Chen. Good to hear your voice. Orders are to maintain position until you signal all clear. Roger, Indomitable. Chen out. Zephyr stared at Marcus with new understanding. Agent Chun? Diplomatic Corps Field Agent, Marcus confirmed. My official job description is Cultural Liaison and Technical Consultant. My unofficial job description is Person who gets called when things go wrong in ways that require creative solution. And the ship? Standard Diplomatic Escort, Marcus said casually. The Indomitable is just a small cruiser. Only about 2 kilometers long, crew of 3,000. Nothing fancy. Vectar made a strangled noise. 2 kilometers? That's larger than most species' capital ships. Is it? I always thought it was kind of compact. Of course, it's designed primarily for exploration and peaceful contact missions. The weapon systems are just for emergencies. Fessa was studying Marcus with new respect and perhaps a little fear. Agent Chun, exactly how many diplomatic vessels does humanity maintain? Oh, I couldn't give you exact numbers, Marcus replied with that same friendly smile that was beginning to terrify Zephyr. That would be classified, but I can tell you that the diplomatic corps takes its responsibilities very seriously. We want to make sure we can respond appropriately to any situation that might arise during cultural exchanges. The final lesson as the crisis passed and the station systems returned to normal, Zephyr found himself alone with Marcus again. The other aliens had gone to spread the news that the emergency was over, leaving the assassin to contemplate the complete failure of his mission. So, Marcus said, settling back into his chair and pulling out his thermos again, where does this leave us? I don't know, Zephyr admitted. I came here to kill you, but now I'm not sure that's possible. Oh, it's possible, Marcus said cheerfully. I'm not invulnerable. But I think you're starting to understand why it might not be advisable. Because of the ship? Partly, but mostly because of what happens when humans lose someone they consider a friend. See, we don't just get angry when our friends are hurt. We get creative, and human creativity applied to revenge is something the galaxy really doesn't want to see. Marcus took a sip of his coffee and looked at Zephyr thoughtfully. Plus, there's the practical consideration. You've been following me for 2 days, we've had several pleasant conversations, and you helped me save the station. In human culture, that makes you my friend now, whether you intended it or not. I don't want to be your friend, Zephyr protested weakly. Too late, Marcus said with a grin. You've been adopted. It's one of humanity's most dangerous traits. We form emotional attachments very quickly, and once we decide someone is part of our group, we'll go to extraordinary lengths to protect them, even if they were sent to kill you. Especially then, Marcus replied, humans love a good redemption story. The fact that you were sent to kill me, but ended up helping me save the station, that's exactly the kind of narrative that appeals to human psychology. You're not an assassin anymore, Zephyr. You're a friend who just needs to find a new purpose in life. The message home that evening, Zephyr sat in his quarters composing a message to his handlers. His claws clicked uncertainly against the communication console as he tried to find words to explain what had happened. Contract termination report, he began, then stopped. How could he explain that he had failed not because of superior firepower or better defenses, but because his target had convinced him that assassination was no longer a viable career path? He started again. Intelligence update regarding human species. Previous assessments are incomplete. Humans are not simply clever engineers or diplomatic negotiators. They are a species that has weaponized friendship itself. Zephyr paused, thinking about everything he had learned. They do not defeat enemies through superior force, though they possess it. They do not win through deception, though they are capable of it. They win by making their enemies want to become their friends. And once you are their friend, they will move heaven and earth to protect you. He considered mentioning the reactor incident, Marcus's casual display of advanced engineering skills, or the presence of a 2-kilometer warship disguised as a diplomatic vessel. Instead, he simply wrote, Recommendation, avoid contracts involving humans. The species has evolved beyond traditional predator-prey relationships. They are apex cooperators, and resistance to cooperation appears to be futile. Before sending the message, Zephyr added one final line, agent requesting reassignment to cultural exchange program. AM interested in exploring career alternatives. As he sent the message, Zephyr realized that he had indeed been fundamentally changed by his encounter with humanity. He had come to Nexus Station as one of the galaxy's most feared predators, but he was leaving as something else entirely. A being who had discovered that there were more interesting things to do with his life than killing people. From the corridor outside his quarters, he could hear Marcus humming as he continued his routine maintenance work. The sound was oddly comforting, and Zephyr found himself looking forward to tomorrow's conversations with his new friend. After all, Marcus had mentioned something about visiting Earth someday, and Zephyr was becoming curious about a planet that could produce beings who turned their enemies into friends and their friends into family. It sounded like exactly the kind of adventure that a former assassin might enjoy. The galaxy, Zephyr realized, was about to become a much more interesting place.